August 17, 1943. The first faint blush of dawn creeps tentatively over the undulating hills of southern Germany, casting a pale, ethereal light on the ancient spires of Schweinfurt's medieval churches and the orderly rows of half-timber houses lining the Regnitz River, while persistent chill mist rises from the main river valley, carrying the damp, earthy scent of dew-kissed meadows, wildflowers, and the faint, acrid tang of industrial smoke wafting from factory chimneys on the outskirts. In a dimly lit operations room buried deep beneath the reinforced concrete of a hillside bunker near Frankfurt, some 60 miles to the west, the air hums with the relentless, monotonous buzz of fluorescent bulbs flickering overhead against the low ceiling and the intermittent crackle of radio static from teletype machines clattering like impatient fingers on a distant keyboard. A young radar operator, barely out his teens, his face ghostly pale and shadowed in the eerie emerald glow of the oscilloscope screen, wipes beads of nervous sweat from his furrowed brow despite the underground chill that seeps through the thick concrete walls, chilling the metal chairs and tabletops. His fingers, callous and stained from endless adjustments to the sensitive dials and knobs, tremble slightly as he traces emerging green blips on the phosphor trace, first a tentative scattering like distant stars, then dozens materializing, swelling inexorably into hundreds like an advancing tidal wave surging from the far west across the vast expanse of the North Sea. Her general, he reports in a voice edge with barely contained urgency to his superior officer, whose crisp uniform bears the silver eagles and iron cross ribbons of the Luftwaffe High Command. The Freya stations along the Dutch and German coasts report a massive formation inbound from England, altitude 25,000 feet, bearing 090, speed approximately 180 knots. Estimated numbers exceeding 300 heavy bombers, with possible escorts. The room, cluttered with oversized maps pinned to the damp walls showing the Reich's air defense zones, overflowing ashtrays brimming with cigarette butts, and steaming mugs of ersatz coffee brewed from acorns, falls into a heavy, oppressive silence, broken only by the rhythmic ticking of a wall-mounted clock marking the inexorable passage of minutes and the muffled rumble of ventilation fans circulating stale air. Skepticism hangs in the atmosphere like the persistent fog rolling in from the river outside, thick and unyielding, a palpable barrier to belief. These are the early warnings from the Reich's vaunted radar network, a technological pinnacle touted by the Führer in his speeches as the unbreakable shield of the fatherland. But profound doubt clouds the minds of the assembled generals and staff officers, their faces etched with the lines of sleepless nights and mounting pressures from the fronts. Could this be yet another deceptive feint, a spectral echo fabricated by British night raiders using electronic trickery, or merely a mirage born of atmospheric interference from the morning thermals? The officers lean closer to the glowing screen, their postures rigid with authority, murmuring dismissals of the reports as exaggeration, Allied propaganda, or operator error, echoes of false alarms that had plagued the system during the recent Hamburg fire raids. Until hours later, as the morning sun climbs higher into a cloudless sky, the western horizon begins to darken, not with the brooding mass of storm clouds gathering over the distant Taunus Mountains, but with the ominous, thunderous silhouettes of American B-17 flying fortresses, an immense armada of gleaming steel and aluminum that blots out the very sun in wave upon unrelenting wave. Descending upon the industrial heartland, like a biblical plague of locusts, its shadow engulfing the land in a moment no man of reason could deny or evade. To comprehend the seismic gravity and far-reaching implications of this pivotal moment in the sweltering summer of 1943, one must retrace the intricate and tumultuous steps back to the precarious dawn of America's precipitous entry into the European theater of operations, where a once fiercely isolationist republic, scarred by the Great War's 116,000 dead and the economic cataclysm of the 1930s Depression, had undergone a profound metamorphosis into an unparalleled industrial leviathan, propelling the grand Allied crusade against the scourge of fascism and totalitarianism. The cataclysmic Japanese assault on Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, 8 Imperial Navy aircraft carriers under Vice Admiral Chuchi Naguma launching 353 dive bombers, torpedo planes, and fighters in meticulously coordinated strike that sank or crippled 18 U.S. warships, including the battleships USS Arizona, 1,177 killed, and USS Oklahoma, 429 dead, while claiming 2,403 American lives in a maelstrom of exploding fuel tanks, roaring flames, and churning oil-slick waters, had irrevocably shattered the fragile illusions of neutrality enshrined in the Neutrality Acts of 1935 to 1939 and the America First Committee's isolationist rhetoric led by figures like Charles Lindbergh. President Franklin Delano Roosevelt, In his resolute address to a joint session of Congress on December 8, 1941, a speech that galvanized a nation with the phrase, "a date which will live in infamy," declared war on Japan, prompting Adolf Hitler to follow suit on December 11th, drawing the United States into the European maelstrom under the strategic Germany First policy hammered out in the ABC One Staff Conferences of March 1941 between American, British, and Canadian planners in Washington. This doctrine prioritized the defeat of Nazi Germany over the Pacific theater, allocating 70% of U.S. resources to Europe while containing Japan through a defensive Europe-Asia swap with Britain. By mid-1943, the United States had surged from a peacetime gross domestic product of $100 billion in 1940 to a wartime colossus exceeding $200 billion annually, with unemployment plummeting from 14% to 1.2% as 16 million men and women entered the armed forces, and 6 million civilians flooded war industries under the Selective Training and Service Act of 1940. Factories in the industrial heartland, Detroit's automobile plants retooled for tanks, Seattle's Boeing facilities for bombers, and Long Beach's shipyards for carriers, operated in 3 8-hour shifts under the War Production Board's stringent directives, overseen by Donald Nelson, producing 48,000 aircraft in 1943 alone, a figure that dwarfed the Axis combined output. At the helm of this aerial offensive stood General Henry Harley Hap Arnold, the commanding general of the U.S. Army Air Forces since 1941, a visionary pilot with 200 flight hours in World War I who championed strategic bombing as a humane alternative to the blood-drenched ground offensives of the previous conflict, evoking the Psalm's 1.2 million casualties in 1916, or Verdun's 700,000 dead in a 10-month inferno of mud and gas. Arnold's doctrine, outlined in his 1941 book, This Flying Game, and refined through the Air War Plans Division, posited that precision daylight raids could dismantle Germany's war economy without the staggering infantry losses of another Western front, drawing inspiration from Italian theorist Giulio de Hetz to command the air, 1921, but tempered by American faith in technology over terror bombing. The 8th Air Force, activated on January 28, 1942, under Major General Ira C. Eaker, established its nerve center at RAF High Wycombe's Pine Tree headquarters and proliferated across East Anglia's flat farmland. Bases like RAF Thornaby-on-Tees for the 90th Bomb Group, Bassingbourn for the 91st, the Ragged Irregulars, Alconbury for the 482nd Pathfinders, and Thorpe Abbotts for the 100th Bloody Hundred, each a sprawling complex of Nissen huts, concrete runways, and bomb dumps, accommodating 3,000 personnel per group. By July 1943, the force had swollen to 48 heavy bomb groups, 15 fighter groups, and 50,000 airmen, many drawn from the diverse fabric of American society. Sons of Oklahoma Dust Bowl farmers enlisting via the civilian pilot training program, New York City machinists qualifying as navigators at pre-flight schools in Texas, and Texas oil roughnecks crewing ball turrets, all bound by the democratic ethos of shared sacrifice under the Espionage Act's call to arms. Central to this burgeoning might was the Boeing B-17 Flying Fortress, an engineering icon that encapsulated the pinnacle of American ingenuity, resilience, and productive capacity in the face of global tyranny. Conceived amid the gathering storm clouds of rearmament in the mid-1930s, the B-17 originated from Boeing's Model 299 prototype, unveiled in 1935 as a response to U.S. Army Air Corps specifications for a multi-engine bomber capable of 200 miles per hour with a 2,000-mile range. Led by Chief Designer Edward Curtis Ed Wells, a meticulous engineer with a background in seaplane hulls, the project overcame a tragic setback when the sole prototype crashed on takeoff at Wright Field on October 30, 1935, due to a locked elevator control, killing test pilot Major Ployer Hill and Boeing Representative Leslie Tower. Yet the evaluators, impressed by its robust structure, dubbed it the Flying Fortress for its armored plating and 13 machine gun station. Evolving through variants, the B-17B with turbo superchargers for high-altitude performance, the B-17E introducing a ventral tub turret. The definitive B-17F and G models by 1943 feature four Wright R-1820 Cyclone radial engines, each delivering 1,200 horsepower at takeoff, enabling a cruising speed of 287 miles per hour, a service ceiling of 35,600 feet, and a combat radius of 720 miles with 6,000 pounds of bombs, extendable to 8,000 for shorter hauls. Defensive armament comprised 13 air-cooled .50 caliber Browning M2 machine guns, nose, chin, dorsal, ventral, two-waist, and twin-tail positions, firing 600 rounds per minute each, while self-sealing fuel tanks in the wings held 2,780 gallons of 100-octane avgas, and redundant hydraulic systems ensure control even after battle damage. The fortress's durability was legendary. Early tests in 1937 over the Mojave Desert saw B-17 as absorbed .50 caliber hits to engines and returned safely, and combat trials in the Philippines in December 1941 proved its mettle when 5 B-17s, caught on the ground at Clark Field, still flew missions despite strafing. Production scaled meteorically under the Army's 1940 contract for 512 units, accelerating to 300 per month by 1943 across Boeing's expanded Wichita Plant 2, a 1.1 million square foot behemoth, Douglas Aircraft's Long Beach facility, adding 1,000 workers monthly, and Vega Aircraft's Burbank plant, absorbing Lockheed's overflow, totaling over 12,731 B-17s by September 1945, a staggering output that employed 1.5 million workers nationwide, including 300,000 women in roles from riveting, fuselages to wiring northern bomb sites. This was the essence of democratic abundance, not the coerced drudgery of the Reich's organization-tote slave labor camps, where 7 million foreigners toiled on a lash, but the voluntary synergy of free enterprise and government mobilization under the cost-plus-fixed-fee contracts of the Defense Plant Corporation, where engineers iterated designs in collaborative forums. Unions like the International Association of Machinists negotiated fair wages under the 1935 Wagner Act, and a society that valued individual innovation over ideological conformity churned out bombers at a rate surpassing the Luftwaffe's pre-war total fleet of 4,000 aircraft. The B-17, with its 103-foot wingspan slicing the skies, symbolized a nation where assembly lines in Seattle debated airfoil curves over coffee breaks, and the GI Bill promised returning crews college education, embodying the plenty born of liberty's forge. The strategic blueprint guiding these iron giants emanated from the Casablanca Conference of January 14th to 24th, 1943, convened in the opulent Anfa Hotel amid Morocco's sun-baked palms, where Roosevelt, British Prime Minister Winston Churchill, and combined chiefs of staff, including U.S. Admiral Ernest J. King, General George C. Marshall, Britain's Field Marshal Alan Brooke, and Air Chief Marshal Sir Charles Portal, forged the Casablanca Directive on January 21st. This pivotal document directed the Anglo-American bomber offensive to undertake the progressive destruction and dislocation of the German military, industrial, and economic system, and the undermining of the morale of the German people to the point where their armed resistance is fatally weakened, prioritizing for target system, submarine construction yards, like those at Kiel and Hamburg, the Luftwaffe's aircraft industry, Messerschmitt in Regensburg, Focke-Wulf in Bremen, oil refineries, Ploesti in Romania, and ball-bearing plants critical to mechanized warfare. American planners, buoyed by the Northern bomb site's promise, a $1.5 billion investment yielding a device with theoretical accuracy of 100 feet at 20,000 feet through Euro-stabilized optics and automatic pilot integration, advocated daylight precision raids to minimize civilian casualties and maximize industrial disruption, diverging from the RAF's area bombing campaign under Air Chief Marshal Arthur Travers Bomber Harris, whose Operation Tomorrow in July 1943 had incinerated Hamburg in firestorms fed by 9,000 tons of bombs, killing 40,000 civilians and displacing 900,000 in a maelstrom of 1,000 bomber nights. Schweinfurt, a picturesque Bavarian city of 40,000 inhabitants, founded in 791 AD, with its Renaissance town hall and annual wine festival, assumed cataclysmic importance as the nerve center of Germany's precision engineering sector. The Kugel-Fischer George Schaefer and Company, AG and Fichtel and Sachs factories, sprawling across 50 acres along the river, manufactured 4.5 million ball bearings monthly, accounting for 70% of the Reich's total output, vital for 80% of aircraft engines, like the Junkers Jumo 211 and Ju-88s, 30% of tank transmissions, Panzer IV and Tiger models, and essential components in U-boat diesel engines, artillery recoil systems, and even household appliances repurposed for war. As detailed in the U.S. Strategic Bombing Survey's Pre-Raid Economic Objectives report of August 1942, compiled by a team of Harvard economists, including Professor John Van Vleck, and analyzed from captured German trade data, a sustained assault on Schweinfurt could trigger a domino effect, halting 20% of Luftwaffe fighter production within weeks. stranding 500,000 Wehrmacht vehicles on the Eastern Front and exacerbating fuel shortages already crippling the panzers after the 1943. Tunisian campaign's 250,000 Axis surrenders. Operation Double Strike, planned by Brigadier General Haywood S. Hansel Jr., the 1st Bomb Wing, and approved by Eaker on August 10th, paired the Schweinfurt raid with a diversionary strike on Regensburg's Messerschmitt Me 109 plant 200 miles south, involving 376 B-17s in the deepest unescorted penetration to date, 300 miles inland beyond P-47 Thunderbolt fighter range limited to 475 miles, and marking the 8th Air Force's audacious bid to seize air superiority in preparation for Operation Overlord, the Normandy invasion projected for spring 1944. For the German High Command and frontline defenders, the summer of 1943 unfolded beneath a brutal veneer of defiant overconfidence and ideological zeal, sustained by the Wehrmacht's string of early blitzkrieg victories and the intoxicating fervor of National Socialist doctrine that portrayed the Reich as the destined vanguard of a new European order. Reichsmarshal Hermann Wilhelm Göring, appointed Luftwaffe commander-in-chief in 1935 and a hero of the Richthofen Circus from the Great War, had thundered in a September 1939 Reichstag speech that, "If one single enemy bomber flies over, you can call me Meyer," a boast that rang hollow after Battle of Britain's 1940 debacle, where 1,734 Luftwaffe aircraft were lost to 1,542 RAF planes in a campaign that cost 2,500 German pilots. Yet, the lightning conquest that followed, Poland's fall in 35 days, September-October 1939, 66,000 Polish military dead, 200,000 civilian casualties, the Low Countries overrun in 18 days, May 1940, 7,000 Dutch, Belgian, and Luxembourg troops killed, and France's capitulation in 6 weeks, May-June 1940, 92,000 French soldiers slain, 1.8 million captured, had instilled an unshakable belief in Aryan racial and technological superiority, amplified by Joseph Goebbels' Ministry of Public Enlightenment and propaganda through newsreels like The Victory in the West, screened in every cinema. By 1943, with the Eastern Front stabilized after the Stalingrad encirclement's 800,000 Axis casualties, November 1942 to February 1943, the High Command clung to the myth of invincibility, viewing the Western Allies as decadent plutocrats whose material excess masked spiritual frailty. The radar defense network, a linchpin of this fortress mentality, had been methodically developed since the 1930s by a cadre of physicists and engineers under the auspices of the Reich Research Council. Rudolf Kuhnhold's 1935 Telefunken experiments with centimeter waves birthed the SeaTac naval sets for Bismarck's gunners, evolving into the 1940 Freya early warning radars, 12-meter freestanding Yagi-Yuta antenna arrays operating at 125 megahertz with a 120 to 200 kilometer detection range and 1 degree accuracy, deployed in a chain of 150 stations from the Norwegian fjords to the Bay of Biscay, extending 100 kilometers inland to protect Aurora and Frankfurt. These fed real-time data to 50 command bunkers via buried landlines and the FUG-16ZY radio net, integrated with 1,000 Wurz/d fire control radar, 50 centimeters wavelength, 25 kilometers range, directing 88 millimeters Flak 36-37 guns and the night fighter belt to the Kammhuber line. A 250-mile deep zigzag of searchlight and fighter zones that claimed 7,000 RAF bombers by 1944. The system, budgeted at 500 million Reichsmarks annually, had proven its mettle in the 1942 Dieppe raid, detecting 6,000 Allied troops ashore and scrambling JG-2 to down 48 aircraft. However, vulnerabilities persisted. Ionospheric reflections caused angel echoes from birds or weather, while Allied ferret reconnaissance flights mapped blind spots, and a high command traumatized by British window chaff drops in July 1943 that blinded Freya during Hamburg, blinding 80% of sets for hours, routinely discounted uncorroborated alerts, insisting on visual or acoustic confirmation from 5,000 Flakehelfer auxiliary spotters, teenage boys and girls manning binoculars in observation towers. In the fraud hours leading to the raid, Luftwaffe intelligence at the Reich Air Ministry in Berlin's Benle block poured over a mosaic of incomplete data, fragmentary decrypts from the British Ultra program, unwittingly revealing Enigma traffic on U-boat dispositions, but silent on U.S. air orders. AR-234 jet reconnaissance photos from July 1943 over East Anglia capturing B-17s taxiing, but estimating only 200 operational, and agent reports from the Abwehr Cicero, Spy, and Ankara hinting at increased sorties without specific. General Adolf Galland, Luftwaffe General der Jagdflieger, since December 1941, and a 104 victory, a scar by a 1941 crash, encapsulated complacency in his post-war 1954 memoir, The First and the Last. We dismiss the Americans as dilettantes in the art of air war, their vast resources squandered on cumbersome giants without the elan of our fighter wolves. Our defenses, flak belts 20 miles thick with 12,000 guns, 300 Jägerschwader squadrons, equipped with Bf-109G, 6S, and FW-198S, stood as an iron curtain, impervious to all but the feeblest probes. Expectations coalesced around a manageable peripheral raid, perhaps 100 to 150 bombers striking coastal targets like the U-boat pens at Loria or the V-1 sites in Pas-de-Calais, intercepted routinely by JG-26 Schlagiter from Abbeville or JG-2 from Kreil, whose pilots, veterans of Barbarossa with 20mm MG-151-20 cannons and 30 million Malawian Quachas 108s, anticipated straightforward victories, much like the 1943 Rouen raid, where 115 B-17s lost 12 to 48 kills. At Schweinfurt's airfields, Fliegerhorst-Herzogenaurach 10 miles north, and dispersals in surrounding forests, ground crews of the 2nd Flak Division conducted feverish drills, camouflaging Me-4 Ten-Hornese heavy fighters under pine branch netting, and test-firing 88mm batteries that had downed 20,000 Allied planes by war's end, 60% by Flak alone. Manpower was taut, with 200 German divisions, 3 million men, shackled to the Eastern Front after Kursk's July 1943 cataclysm, 800,000 Axis losses to 1.6 million Soviet, the Afrika Korps annihilated in Tunisia, 250,000 captured, and Italian campaigns draining reserves, yet soldiers in Hermann-Göring parachute Panzer Division manning flak sites, and Luftwaffe pilots in their heated cockpits drew sustenance from the Führer's Volksgemeinschaft ideology, the people's community of racial purity, total mobilization, and unyielding will propagated in Hitler Youth indoctrination, and the strength through joy leisure programs. In the bunkers and transit barracks, low murmurs of anticipated triumph circulated. Another daylight incursion repelled, like the March 1943 Munich feint, where 100 bombers turned back after 20 losses, reinforcing home front morale amid 1943's rationing. 2,200 calories daily, ersatz butter from margarine, and coal shortages leaving Berlin homes at 50 degrees Fahrenheit. What erupted instead was a maelstrom that tore those illusions to shreds, the B-17 Armada materializing from the morning haze to impose a visceral, soul-searing reckoning that reverberated through the Reich's core. At precisely 6:25 a.m., the first waves of 376 B-17s from the 1st, 3rd, and 4th bomb wings, encompassing 13 bomb groups like the 91st at Bassingbourn, 18 planes led by Major John C. Egan, the 305th at Chelston, 21 aircraft under Colonel Curtis E. LeMay, the pipe-smoking tactician who would later firebomb Tokyo, and the 306th at Lee, thundered off East Anglia's dew-slick runways in a staggered sequence, their 48 engines, 1,200 horsepower each, belching blue smoke as they clawed skyward, forming 3 massive combat boxes over the wash, a colossal inverted V 60 miles long and 15 miles wide, with lead low and high squadrons stacked at 23,000 to 28,000 feet for mutual protection. Navigators, peering through drift meters and consulting GH chain radio signals from Welsh transmitters, plotted courses via dead reckoning and sunshots, each fortress groaning under 12 500-pound M43 general-purpose bombs in fuse racks, 30-second delays for airburst fragmentation, and 5,000 rounds of .50 caliber ammunition per gun. Crossing the channel at 10,000 feet by 9 a.m., the formation climbed through broken cumulus to 25,000 feet, oxygen masks fogging in the minus 30 degrees Fahrenheit chill as they skirted the Zuiderzee at 11:30 a.m. There, the Luftwaffe's response ignited rotten pairs of Bf-109G 6S from JG-1, OSAW at Dielen, 40 planes under Major Hans Zellers, dive from 30,000 feet with rocket pods, were for granted 21 centimeters unguided missiles, loosing salvos that explode in the boxes like shattering thunderclaps, while FW-198S from JG-300, Wild Sow, Wild Boar, used shallow glides to rake bellies with 20mm fire. B-17 gunners, waist crew in fur-lined jackets, Ball turret operators cramped in plexiglass spheres traversed their Brownings in frantic arcs, tracers weaving a lethal web that claimed 22 German fighters in the first hour, debris raining into the North Sea. The emotional chasm between the German defenders' sanguine expectations and the raid's harrowing actuality yawned as vast and unbridgeable as the bombed-out craters soon pocketing the fatherland, a profound dissonance that inscribed terror and disillusionment into the very sinews of the thousand-year Reich's martial soul. Luftwaffe pilots, ascending with hearts aflame in the predatory thrill of the hunt, expecting to eviscerate a lumbering, ill-coordinated swarm using superior roll rates, FW-190's 413 miles per hour dive, and marksmanship forged in the Eastern Front's vast skies, where JG-52 amassed 10,000 victories against Yak-9s, found themselves ensnared in a vortex of interlocking defensive fire from 3,768.50 caliber guns across the Armada, shredding wings and cockpits in a storm of 600 rounds per minute fury. Oberleutnant Erich Rudorfer, the 136th Victory expert of JG-2 Richthofen, who sortied 4 times that day from Vendeville Airfield, his Me-109 G6 laden with 300 rounds per cannon, conveyed in post-war interviews archived at the Luftwaffe Historical Center in Fürstenfeldbruck the Raw. Gut-wrenching dismay. We climbed into the glare of the sun, pulses racing with the ancient joy of the eagle's stoop, only confront a black, impenetrable cloud eclipsing the heavens, wave upon inexhaustible wave. Their guns a wall of lead. Our cannons thundered defiance, but they advanced undeterred, absorbing our fury like monoliths. This was no fleeting raid, but a deluge from the factories of some insatiable forge, shaking the foundations of our resolve. On the ground at Schweinfurt, flak crews of the 12th Flak Division, 1,200 men in steel helmets, loading 88mm shells weighing 20 pounds each into breeches, had anticipated a brief, containable barrage, sirens wailing for 10 to 15 minutes as in the April 1943 Wilhelmshaven strike. 100 bombers, 12 lost. Civilians in the city's 18th century St. Jacob's Church and purpose-built Hock bunker shelters expected the all-clear by noon, children clutching gas masks amid the hum of air raid drills. Instead, at 2 p.m., the lead box of 60 B-17s from the 101st Group wheeled over the target in a 1,500-foot wide pattern, bombardiers releasing toggles at 2:35 p.m. under LeMay's tight control, unleashing 1.2 million pounds of high explosives in 45 minutes of unrelenting precision, cratering 34 acres, demolishing 70% of Kugelfischer's machine shops with 600 lathes twisted into scrap, igniting warehouses holding 600,000 bearings in blazes that raged for days, and shattering Fichtel and Sachs assembly halls where 10,000 workers had punched in that morning. Flak shells, 300,000 fired from 305 88mm and 105mm guns in 20 batteries, fused for 500-foot bursts, painted the sky black with 10,000 shrapnel fragments per round. Yet the fortresses weathered an average 400 hits per plane. The 303rd Groups, the All-American, piloted by Lieutenant Edward J. Mennick, absorbed 400 strikes, including a severed tail. Yet co-pilot Lieutenant Kendall Roy nursed at home on 2 engines over 500 miles, crew tending wounds amid hydraulic smoke. For the defenders, the envisioned quick intercepts dissolved into a desperate, attritional bloodletting. 60 German fighters spiraled to earth in flames, 55 confirmed by OKL tallies. Their pilots, many with 50-plus victories, bailed into parachutes over burning fields, while 138 B-17s limped back damaged, 60 lost outright, 600 airmen killed or captured. A 1:1 exchange that concealed the Reich's irreplaceable hemorrhage of 2,500 experienced pilots by 1944 versus America's 100,000 trainees graduating monthly from bases like Randolph Field. The horizon's ominous blackening, a steel eclipse lasting 20 minutes over the city, imprinted a collective visceral dread, the general scoffing doubt transmuting into the thunderous, inescapable reality of an enemy's boundless, democratic plenty. Historical evidence delineates this aerial Armageddon with meticulous, irrefutable precision, interwoven from declassified archives, mission logs, photographic reconnaissance, and survivor testimonies that blend quantitative data with the poignant cadence of human endurance and hubris. The U.S. Army Air Force's official Mission 85 report, drafted by the 8 Bomber Command Staff at High Wycombe's Pine Tree headquarters under Eaker's signature and declassified in 1973 via the Freedom of Information Act, chronicles the operation's exhaustive timeline. 376B. 17 FS and GS departed between 6:25 and 7:30 a.m. from 13 East Anglian airfields, e.g., 19 from Polbrook for 96 Group, forming up over Thetford at 8,000 feet despite 10% aborts from engine overheating in the humid dawn. 291 crossed the enemy coast near Ostend at 10:15 a.m., evading coastal flak from Ostend's 128mm batteries, while 19 turned back for weather over the Wash and 18 for mechanical issue, for superchargers failed on the 351st Group's lead ship. Bombing runs, executed in 3 waves with the northern sights crosshairs locked on the IP initial point at Bamberg, achieved a circular error probable of 300 feet per lead bombardier logs. 230 planes over the target dropped 711 tons, 1.2 million pounds, in patterns 800 yards by 2,000 yards, cratering 34 acres and destroying 12 major buildings at Kugelfischer, 70% floor space, and 5 at Fichtel and Sachs, 40%, as corroborated by F-5 Lightning overflights on August 18th. Yielding 200 stereo photos analyzed at Meddenham's RAF Central Interpretation Unit, German archives, seized by the 7th Armored Division in April 1945 and dissected in the United States Strategic Bombing Survey's 1945 volume, The Effects of Strategic Bombing on the German War Economy, directed by economist John Kenneth Galbraith, quantify the devastation. Ball bearing production plummeted 38% in September 1943. From 4.5 million to 2.8 million units monthly, idling 200,000 workers across 50 plants, and triggering a 12% immediate shortfall that cascaded to aircraft output. Messerschmitt Regensburg halted 50% of Me-109G production for 2 months. Focke-Wulf Bremen reported 30% engine failures from substitute graphite bearings. Luftwaffe operations diaries from the Oberkommando der Luftwaffe, OKL, in Berlin's Tiergarten headquarters, preserved in 200 volumes of the Bundesarchiv in Koblenz and microfilm post-war, illuminate the radar's foresight and folly. Freya Station walked at Wangerooge detected the Armada at 150 miles, 9:45 a.m., relaying plots accurate to 5 nautical miles via the GCI net to Fighter Command at Dobritz, with Würzburg sets tracking climbs to 25,000 feet. Yet General Hans Jeschneck, OKL, Chief of Staff and a protege of Goring scarred by the 1940 Norway fiasco, dismissed the 10:15 alert in a staff conference as another British mosquito trick or jamming artifact, per minutes recorded by Adjutant Major Nicholas von Below, delaying JG-300's 120-plane scramble from Bonn-Handler by 30 minutes, allowing the formation to penetrate 100 miles unchallenged. Field Marshal Erhard Milch, Goring's deputy for armament since 1940 and architect of the 1942 production miracle, doubling output to 15,000 aircraft, articulated the reckoning in his October 1946 Nuremberg interrogation transcript, declassified in 2001. Our radar chains, those vigilant sentinels of the ether, screamed the truth of the approaching storm, but pride and precedent blinded us like the densest fog over the Rhine. When those American behemoths darkened the firmament in their multitudes, we confronted the inexorable pivot of the war, their democratic forges birthing an aerial host we could neither equal nor endure. Eyewitness accounts from Schweinfurt's defenders, compiled in the 1947 Bavarian State Archives Air War Oral Histories Project, interviewing 150 survivors, evoked the pandemonium. Air raid sirens, installed in 1939 under the Reichsschutzbund, wailed for 25 minutes pre-impact, herding 20,000 civilians into 50 shelters as glaciers boarded windows. Flake Helfer boys like 16-year-old Hans Muller described loading shells amid the sky falling black, while a Kugelfischer foreman, Dieter Krauss, noted in his diary, recovered in 1945, the earth shook as if the gods warred above. Our machines, symbols of German precision, lay twisted like the dreams of invincibility. Casualty ledgers from the Schweinfurt City Clinic report 40 civilian deaths, including 12 children from collapsing roof and 150 wounded from flying glass and blast waves traveling at 300 meters per second, a toll dwarfed by the 600 American airmen lost, but emblematic of the home front's creeping terror. The B-17 Flying Fortress, that colossal, droning emblem of American abundance recurring like a relentless leitmotif through the raid's tempest, permeated every facet of the confrontation, its form and thunder symbolizing the democracy's inexhaustible wellspring of innovation, equity, and collective resolve. Far beyond a mere instrument of destruction, the fortress embodied the harmonious convergence of free market vitality and mobilized citizenry. Conceptualized in Boeing's collaborative design studios in Seattle, where 1930s patents for superchargers were licensed openly under Sherman antitrust oversight, it was crewed by 10-man teams of average age 23, Pilots like Captain Lewis P. Ensign, a 24-year-old Idaho farm boy trained at Luke Field, bombardiers from Brooklyn's technical high schools, sighting through Nordens calibrated at Eglin Proving Ground, and radio operators from Chicago's Polish enclaves tuning SER 522 sets amid flak bursts. Each B-17, with its bomb bay doors yawning open like the cornucopia of plenty to disgorge ordnance in measured salvos, underscored the chasm. The U.S. economy's gross national product had ballooned to $214 billion by 1943, allocating $50 billion to aviation, 25% of federal spending, enabling the dispatch of 376 bombers, the absorption of 60 losses, and the assembly of 400 replacements by September from 1943's total output of 86,000 aircraft, outpacing the Luftwaffe's 25,000 for the year. By 3:1, the Fortress's engines, thundering at 2,100 revolutions per minute in a four-part harmony audible 50 miles away, evoked the assembly lines of Henry Ford's Willow Run plant near Detroit, a mile-long marvel completed in 1942, birthing AB-24 Liberator every 58 minutes under electric lights, manned by 42,000 workers, half women. Protected by the Fair Labor Standards Act's overtime pay and the Office of War Information's morale film, this abundance was democratic to its core. Crews flew under rotation policies, 25 missions for a tour with 50% survival odds, medevac by sea 47 Dakotas to 2,000-bed hospitals stocked with sulfa drugs from Pfizer labs, while Luftwaffe pilots endured indefinite service. Their 70% fatality rate by 1940 for a grim toll of hierarchical rigidity. As the boxes tightened over the low countries, the B-17 silhouette etched against the sun, 103-foot wings spanning like bridges of steel, signified resilience. 90% of damaged planes returned to bases like Hardwick, where ground crews from a 93rd Group repaired 200 hits overnight using 10,000 rivets daily. Resupplied by 100,000-ton convoys from Norfolk via the Murmansk Run, embodying a nation's capacity to sustain not just machines, but the human spirit fueling them. This harrowing crucible over Schweinfurt in the Rhine Valley wrought a transformative alchemy within the German military and societal ethos, fracturing the monolithic edifice of National Socialist supremacy and infusing a pervasive, corrosive fatalism that accelerated the Reich's inexorable unraveling from within. Prior to the raid, the Wehrmacht's operational worldview, codified in General Werner von Blomberg's 1933 Total War Memorandum and amplified by Adolf Hitler's expansionist visions in Mein Kampf, 1925, envisioning Lebensraum through racial conquest, exalted the Aryan warrior's indomitable spirit and technological edge, blitzkrieg as manifest destiny, with attrition dismissed as the recourse of inferior foes, as evidenced in the 1940 French campaign's 27-day victory, 360,000 Allied captured, and the 1941 Barbarossa offensive's initial 3,000-kilometer advance. Generals like Walther Warlimont, Deputy Chief of the Wehrmachtführungsstab, Armed Forces Operations Staff, since 1940, had altered OKW Directive No. 51 in November 1943, assuming Allied air campaigns would falter under 20% loss rates, mirroring the 1942 flak year, where 1,000 RAF bombers were down over the Ruhr. The B-17 Armada's blackening horizon compelled an abrupt, soul-searching reappraisal. In the acrid smoke of the aftermath, as Ju-188 reconnaissance planes circled the craters at 3 p.m., photographing 1,200 bomb impacts, and Luftwaffe salvage teams from the 1st Air Fleet tallied 138 B-17 wrecks strewn from Aachen to the Dutch coast. 60 confirmed shot down, 78 crash-landed. Commanders gathered in the Zossen suburbs' Oak H bunker for emergency conclaves. Galland, in an August 20th, 1943, Memorandum de Goring Archive in the German Federal Military Archives at Freiburg, Volume GG/12, urged a doctrinal overhaul. The American-type boxes and gun platforms necessitate revised tactics, head-on penetrations at 600 kilometers per hour, mass flak concentrations, and an immediate expansion of pilot training from 2,000 to 10,000 annually, resources we presently lack amid the Eastern Bleed. Goring, the once jovial Luftwaffe potentate whose 1936 four-year plan had militarized the economy, spiraled into despondency, holing up at his opulent Carenhall estate north of Berlin with morphine-laced rants. His October 1946 suicide by smuggled cyanide capsule, hours before the Nuremberg gallows, was inextricably shadowed by the cumulative humiliations of raids like Schweinfurt, where his vaunted defenses crumbled. For the rank and file, Flak gunners in the Hermann-Göring Division loading shells until barrels warped at 800 rounds per hour. Fighter pilots like Lieutenant Walter Nowotny of JG-54 nursing Me-109's back with perforated radiators. The incursion eroded the pervasive myth of invulnerability. Personal diaries from JG-54 Grunhers pilots, recovered during the 1944 East Prussian retreats and translated in the 1950s U.S. Air Force Historical Research Agency collection, evoke a creeping existential despair. The Yankees descend like biblical locusts from their transatlantic hives, endless and unbreakable. What Fuhrer god or Teutonic sorcery grants them such prodigious numbers, while our fatherland starves for fuel and youth? Internal morale surveys conducted by the Sicherheitsdienst SD in Flak Regiment 133 near Frankfurt, declassified in 1995, registered a 25% surge in Kriegmüdigkeit, war weariness, reports by September 1943, with absenteeism rising 15% among 18-year-old Flakhelfer conscripts indoctrinated in Hitler youth camps. This perceptual metamorphosis cascaded to command echelons, compelling a strategic and ideological redirection from aggressive expansion to a beleaguered, fortress-bound defense that sapped the Reich's vitality. Hitler himself, in a stormy September 4, 1943, conference at the Berghof documented by stenographer Heinrich Heim in the 1951 compilation Hitler's Table Talk, Volume 2, inveighed against the Judeo-Bolshevik air terror unleashed by Roosevelt's plutocratic vulture, yet issued Führer Directive No. 51 reallocating 24 divisions, 300,000 men, and 2,088 mm guns from Army Group Center on the Eastern Front to the Reichsluftverteidigung, air defense of the Reich, where flak expenditures ballooned from 1 million shells monthly to 4 million by 1944. The ideology of total war, once a rallying cry under Joseph Goebbels' February 18, 1943, Sportpalast speech, "Do you want total war?" morphed into a veil for vulnerability. The October 1944 Volksturm decree conscripted 6 million civilians, ages 16 to 60, into rudimentary anti-aircraft and infantry roles, arming them with 1940 vintage Carabiner 98 KS amid factory blackouts, and evacuation drills displacing 1.2 million from the Ruhr. The B-17, with its formations dispersing like a flock after the bomb run, low squadron veering south to evade pursuing FW-190, high squadron climbing to 28,000 feet, inflicted not only material devastation, but a psychological suppurating wound. Subsequent raids amplified the fracture. The second Schweinfurt mission on October 14, 1943. 291 B-17s, 77 loss of 186 fighters. Dubbed Black Thursday, shattered remaining illusions, prompting Speer's Armaments Ministry to disperse 80% of barren production to 200 underground sites like the Cowern Tunnels. By Operation Big Week, February 20th to 25th, 1944, 3,000 bombers and 1,000 fighters pulverizing 75% of Luftwaffe fighter factories. The Western Front mustered only 300 operational planes, aces depleted to 500 from 2,000 in 1942. Schweinfurt's legacy echoed in the Ardennes Offensive, December 1944, where 16,000 Allied sorties under Operation Clarion denied Luftwaffe support, stranding 1,500 panzers in mud and fuel famine, hastening the Rhine crossing. For the generals who had derided the radar's insistent blips, the fortress's inexorable advance reshaped their worldview. The fluid blitzkrieg of 1939 to 1941 yielded to static, Maginot-like crouch, the Reich's ossified command structure, insulated from dissent by the Führerprinzip leader principle, contrasted starkly with the Allies' adaptive democracy. Where Roosevelt's fireside chats fostered public buy-in, congressional committees like the Truman Committee audited waste, saving $15 billion, and inter-service debates refined tactic, fueling an escalation that turned the skies into a no-man's land of Allied dominion. Factual chronicles from both belligerents amplified this ideological schism, layering irrefutable statistics with resonant voices that humanized the ledger of loss and awakening. The 8th Air Force's casualty roster from Mission 85, preserved in the 1943 Summary of Operations at the Air Force Historical Research Agency in Maxwell, Alabama, enumerates 60 B-17s destroyed, 36 by fighters, e.g., the 384th Group's Piccadilly Lily, rammed by a Bf-109 over Aachen, 22 by flak, the 351 SDs. Homesick Angels shredded over the Ruhr, 2 to mid-air collisions, with 600 airman fatalities, 405 killed in action, 150 wounded, 45 prisoners. Their youth averaged 22 years chronicled. In 100 Missing Air Crew, reports detailing personal effects like letters from sweethearts returned via the Red Cross. German OKL after-action summaries, filed in August 1943 under Gestioneck's office and declassified during German reunification in 1990. Bundesarchiv Militärkreis 19, report 55 fighters lost, 22 pilots killed, 33 wounded or captured, with JG 300 critique noting ineffective Schrägmusik/upward firing due to bomber box density and .50 caliber return fire overwhelming at 300 meters. Quotes in the fray cut through the numbers. Captain Haywood S. Hansel Jr., first bomb wing commander and architect of high-altitude doctrine, wired Eaker from Pine Tree at 8 p.m. We have struck the vital heart. The cost mounts high in blood and aluminum, but the wound inflicted festers deep, promising the attrition of their sinews. On the German side, Major Joseph Kamhuber, architect of the night fighter line since 1940, confided in a private September 1943 diary entry, seized with his papers in 1945, and published in the 1970 biography, Kamhuber, Defender of the Reich, "The radar did not deceive. We deceived ourselves in arrogance's thrall. The American steel birds, legions and their abundant arsenals, herald the twilight of our sovereign skies and the dawn of subjugation." Industrial audits from Albert Speer's Ministry of Armaments, captured in the 1945 Berlin raid and analyzed in the USSBS's 1946 ball bearings report, confirmed the raid's ripple. A 12% output drop idled 100,000 laborers, 40% women from occupied territories, forcing reliance on Swedish imports, up 200% via the Baltic, and synthetic substitutes that increased aircraft defect rates to 40% by November 1943, while diverting 500,000 tons of steel monthly to disperse. Factories like the Mittelwerk V2 site in Nordhausen. The human cost on the ground. Schweinfurt's 40 civilian dead buried in mass graves at the municipal cemetery. 5,000 homeless amid 2,000 shattered homes. Underscore the home front's fraying, with Goebbels' propaganda ministry issuing censored communiques claiming heroic repulse of 200 raiders, 50 enemy destroyed, yet underground leaflets from the White Rose resistance circulated truths, eroding faith in the regime. As the strategic bombing campaign intensified, Pelosi's Operation Tidal Wave on August 1, 1943, 177 B-24s, 53 lost to 40 millimeters fire, 310 tons on refineries. The Berlin raids commencing March 4, 1944, 730 bombers breaching defenses, 72 lost. And the February 1945 Dresden firestorm, 1,200 RAF and USAF planes, 25,000 dead. The B-17 symbolic presence and perceptual shift grew ever more pronounced, its droning formations a constant specter against the fractured horizons of a crumbling empire. In the vice of combat boxes over the Elbe, gunners .50 calibers unleashed 600 rounds per minute in synchronized bursts, embodying the depth of American abundance. Each fortress toted 5,000 rounds of API, armor-piercing incendiary, ammo, resupplied by 100,000-ton Liberty ship convoys from U.S. East Coast ports via the Azores route, while Luftwaffe 20mm belts rationed to 150 rounds per sortie amid tungsten shortages from Portuguese mines. This material cornucopia, $2 billion monthly in Lend-Lease aid to Britain, including 14,000 aircraft, mirrored democracy's foundational equity. B-17 crews, diverse in origin, 20% Jewish bombardiers, 10% African-American ground support, rotated after 25 missions under Army Air Forces Regulation 35-3, with 50% completing tours versus the Luftwaffe's grind where 80% of JG-52 perished by 1944. The fortress's return rate, after Schweinfurt, 138 damaged planes repaired at a 95% clip by 5,000 man maintenance depots using 1943's $10 billion logistics budget. Contrast to the Reich's 50% write-off rate. Pilots like Major Erich Hartmann, 352 kills, flying 1,400 missions without relief. By D-Day on June 6, 1944, 12,000 B-17 sorties had eviscerated 80% of German air power, the 8th Air Force alone downing 6,000 fighters. The fortress, with its Nordendrop payloads cratering synthetic oil plants, reducing aviation fuel 90% by September 1944, became the auditory and visual thread of transformation, a droning harbinger that dismantled not just factories, but the ideological pillars of a regime predicated on fear and exclusion, yielding to the inclusive momentum of free people. In the epilogue of the Stratospheric Odyssey, as the last fading contrails of the B-17s dissolve into the boundless vault of history's expanse, and the scarred factories of Schweinfurt slowly yield to the humble hum of post-war reconstruction amid the rubble-strewn fields. The Armada's blackening of the horizon unveils an eternal, resonant verity forged in the crucible of thunder and unyielding resolve. The flying fortress, born from democracy's abundant and inclusive fires, where riveters' hands and engineers' minds converge in liberty's grand workshop, transcended the realm of mere metal, propellers, and payload. It pierced the veil of tyrannies erected on coercion, racial myth, and the subjugation of the human spirit, its wings bearing aloft not the flames of vengeance alone, but the illuminating promise of innovation, unity, and shared sacrifice. In those vast formations that once eclipsed the sun over the Rhine, we discern a profound, timeless truth. Freedom's plenty, nurtured by open discourse, equitable toil, and an inexhaustible wellspring of collective will, outshines the shadowed fury of oppression's rage, propelling humanity not toward endless cycles of conquest and domination, but toward the radiant dawn of justice and renewal. The radar's once doubted blip swelled to crescendo of certainty's mighty roar, affirming that true might resides not in the iron alone, but in the ennobling ideals that lift it skyward, forever clearing the horizons for liberty's vigilant, abundant, and enduring watch.